It's a great pleasure to introduce Julie Winkle Giulioni today. Julie is the co-author of Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go, the second edition released earlier this year. Julie, it's great to have you here.
Art, I have been so looking forward to this. After all these years that we've known each other in the virtual space, it's nice to really connect live.
It is incredible. I have so appreciated your social media support and all of the content that you've provided. You're just one of those individuals that's been delightful to engage with over the years. And so this is something I've been looking forward to for weeks. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
All right, so let's talk. The second edition of the book, writing a book, the first edition is a considerable effort. I believe it had been, about a 7-year time lag between the first and second edition. What spurred the idea for round two?
Well, we published with Barrett Kohler, and I just can't say enough, good things about that publisher. They are just remarkable. And they really stay on top of what's going on in the marketplace and what's going on with each of their books. And Steve Persanti, who is the founder of Barrett Kohler, and he was the editor on our book, came to us and said, it's still selling well. There's still a need there, but enough time has passed to where it really makes sense to just sort of hit the pause button, step back and evaluate, is there something new? Are there different approaches? Is there a new context that exists that would make this a more valuable tool to the readers? And so Bev and I spent some time doing exactly that. And what we realized was that in many ways, the advice in the book was still valid. And yet the context has changed a bit. The workforce is a little different. The pressures are a little greater. And so we did go ahead and we decided that it made sense to do not a massive update, probably 20% or so was updated.
Still, yeah, and that has to be fun to come back and refresh and kind of validate what concepts are holding and what might change. And we live and learn, right? So we grow a bit smarter. I look back at some of my earlier works and I occasionally cringe. It's like, okay, I've thought this through a little bit better now. Let's clarify.
Exactly. That was one of the areas that was really most satisfying to me because with the first edition, it went off and I thought, well, that's quite perfect. And then as I was reading it over the years, I would think, oh, man, we could have come up with something better than that or whatever. And so it was a really nice opportunity to take some of those little glitchy things and take them to the next level.
So, it's all about developing people. It's a wonderful guide for anyone who manages or is responsible for the development of others. I think you do a nice job positioning that. If you're developing others, this is good no matter what title it is. And oh, by the way, apply the concepts to yourself. And you do a great job of asking, what should you do or what do you think? I forget your exact phrasing in there, but you do that. So let's start with maybe kind of an obvious question. What is it that we as managers do wrong what do we get wrong when it comes to developing employees? And do we have enough time to cover that?
Yeah. How many podcasts are we going to record?
We'll do a mini series.
Fair enough. All right. Then I'll just start with kind of the high level. What happens is, over the years, what I've come to believe is that the word career is a bit of a trigger word for a lot of people. It kind of hijacks the brain and moves our consciousness and our thoughts and our expectations in kind of funny directions. And when you add development to it, it's career development. For managers, we get into sort of this administrative, business-like, mode that we're going to do a series of activities and we're going to meet with somebody, once a year. And it becomes procedural. People get all caught up in the paperwork and the processes and the programs and the promotions, of course. And yet when I work with groups, and I've done this exercise with maybe 20,000 leaders around the world, and ask them to just step back and say, who helped you develop and grow the most? And what did they do? It's just this human conversation about trust and engagement and listening and encouragement and having someone's back and offering opportunities, throwing them into the deep end of the pool, but being there with a life preserver just in case. Becomes this really human sort of activity. And so I think for a lot of leaders, what they're doing wrong is they're making it a human resources endeavor rather than the human endeavor that it is. Helping people grow comes very naturally when we strip it back to, what are the basics? How can we be there for people, hold the space for their development, and give them the support that they need?
Really well said. So, having been guilty of managing and leading in organizations for over 25 years, which is dating me, I'm kind of thinking about the response that I might have had in some settings to that individual who was sort of challenging for that growth path.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it shows up in the phrase from the employee of, I need to know what my career path is.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that the manager is completely flummoxed in terms of how to answer that question. It's not, so there's two things going wrong there. The manager is feeling this incredible pressure to do something extraordinary, and the employee is putting all the weight of his or her development on the manager's shoulders. And that just doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't. And your experience, as you're describing it, it's what so many leaders experience day in and day out in organizations.
Sure.
And that pressure, I think, is getting even greater and greater. In a lot of ways, we have sort of trained and conditioned employees to be these passive consumers of career development services. And so managers do have feel like they're on the line to make something happen. And the other thing that's challenging is this notion of career paths. It's kind of breaking down in a lot of organizations.
Yeah, I think you used the phrase, look in all directions, right? It's not a ladder any longer. It's all over.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yet again, kind of back to how the brain gets triggered and hijacked. You think about career, and even as much as I work in this space, if you woke me up from a dead sleep, I would say ladder. It's just so deeply ingrained. And so
Right.
We have to really educate employees to think differently about what career even means. And you think about the changing landscape. Folks are staying in a company for 4.3 years is the average tenure now.
Yeah, and I think that I know certainly I'm guilty of a lot of things. 31 and 28-year-old children. Yeah, and they don't have 4-year tenures in their jobs, nor do their friends, significant others, or what have you. So I'm seeing that. I see a lot of my own, individuals, pros my age that have kind of shifted careers, and they're not hanging around for a long time anymore.
Exactly. And so is it even reasonable to think that in a short time span that you have with someone that you're going to develop a whole career? Increasingly, I'm really starting to work with organizations and help them sort of break it up and think about what are the building blocks. You can't develop a whole career in a couple of years, but you could develop greater competence or more connections or more confidence or whatever it might be.
Right. So, one of the things I thought of as I was reading the book was this concept of design thinking, and in a book that I love, Design Your Life. Mm-hmm. And they talk about not trying to solve for your entire life, but solve just for the next stage. And what's your perspective or reaction to that as it relates to the manager-employee scenario there?
I think it's probably the most powerful way forward when it comes to development. So frequently when a manager sits down with an employee, the go-to question is, where do you see yourself in 5, 7, 10 years?
Can't we ban that question?
Yeah, it's maddening. I would love to. Let's do a project together on that.
Okay.
Because it's all about, like 10 years, my gosh. I was reading something, 85% of the jobs that we're going to be doing in the year 2030 haven't been invented yet.
Yeah.
So to get people talking about what they're going to be in 10 years, it's ludicrous. So there are a couple of things wrong with that. It focuses on what people want to be rather than what they want to do. And so part of the conversation needs to be, what do you want to do? Because at that point, once a manager knows that, then you can start inviting all sorts of richness and opportunity and development right into the envelope of someone's current role.
So how does the manager play it? Because a response to that is, I want your job, or I want to be a manager. I hear that all the time. And the next question is, well, why do you want to manage? And then it's a fascinating dialogue from there. But
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the what do you want to be? That's kind of a frame shift for everybody involved. Or what do you want to do?
What do you
Um,
want to do? What kinds of
yeah,
problems do you want to solve? What kinds of technology do you want to work with? What kinds of challenges are you up for? What do you want to accomplish? Those kinds of doing questions just really open the mind and the door to all sorts of possibilities.
so you have a wonderful concept in the book of hindsight, foresight, and the merging of those two into insight. Tell us a little bit about that and how a manager might use those tools.
So the core concept in the book, from my perspective, is that career development really boils down to conversation. And
Mm-hmm.
if we can help leaders sort of take all the complexity away from it and realize it's really about dialogue with another person, then that's something that's way more doable for folks. And so what we knew was that managers have pitifully little time, and we had to
Sure.
offer a framework for thinking about that dialogue in a way that would operate at the speed of business. And so it's a framework for the kinds of conversations, the kinds of questions that you can ask of folks. Hindsight is all about helping folks look inward and backward at where they've been, what they love, what they're great at, maybe what they don't want to, engage in. Foresight is about looking forward and
Mm-hmm.
outward at what are the needs of the organization, what's going on in our industry, even the bigger world, economically, politically, environmentally. What are all those factors? And that's a lot of conversation that isn't normally on the radar screen of a manager or supervisor when they're
Sure.
talking about career development. But then the intersection, as you said, where I've been, what I've done, what I love, and what are the needs of the business, where are things going here? That's insight. And that's just a sweet spot to mine for possibilities and opportunities and actions and learning to move folks forward.
That's such a wonderful model. I love that. Maybe a bit of a sidebar. I work with many individuals who are a little later in their careers, late 40s to mid 50s or so. And they're into that reinvent mode where they have wisdom, they have experience. They, however, want to find a way to do what they love, to apply their skills and apply that wisdom in different ways. In your perspective on the hindsight in particular is my starting point. I haven't been as eloquent or as articulate as you, but it's such a powerful insight generator for us in those discussions. I love the application of it to the manager and the career discussion.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to be honest with you, those questions really apply to anyone in all
Yeah,
sorts of settings,
sure.
don't they?
Absolutely.
Just
Absolutely.
deepening that self-awareness is good in the workplace, outside of the workplace, everywhere.
Right. So I want to grab a couple of comments or quotes from the book here. One that I loved, quality career development boils down to quality conversations, and you want us to reframe career development in such a way that the responsibility rests squarely with the employee and that your role becomes more about prompting, guiding, reflecting, exploring ideas, activating enthusiasm, and driving action. Wow, I love that. That is, how does a manager cultivate that skill? Because the logic makes sense. The actual coaching perspective that comes through there is not necessarily innate to every manager. How do we start?
Well, I think part of it is just the mindset of really clarifying what our role is vis-a-vis the development of others. I think a lot of managers over the years have kind of avoided the whole development thing because it just feels like too much to put that person on your back and carry them, from where
They avoid it or they lump it into some evil annual performance evaluation and abstract goals and yeah.
and then nothing ever happens.
Right.
Yeah. So I think part of it is really the mindset shift, internalizing that as a leader, you can engineer the environment that supports people. You can offer support. You can be encouraging. You can create the space for folks. But that when it comes right down to it, each individual really owns their career. And they need to be the ones who are in the driver's seat, setting the pace, setting the direction. And so part of it is a mindset shift. Part of it is a skill set shift for the employee, offering them some of the skills to be able to internalize this and take the lead.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, from a manager's perspective, we do need to develop some conversational, some coaching skills. And on the road to that, because, those are skills that I think that we can hone and develop over
Right.
the course of our lives. I don't think we ever get there, with coaching. But what we tried to do in the book was offer a gazillion questions, because if you've got the question, a really good, juicy, thought-provoking question, and you can ask that with the spirit of curiosity and really listen, that creates a space for growth right there.
Would suspect that the manager has to work hard at being genuine, at being authentic, and making certain that empathy is part of this discussion for the employee to really seize hold of it and begin to do their part in the process.
Yeah, the other word that comes up a lot when, again, I go through that exercise of who helped you grow and what did they do, another word that comes up a lot is just trust. That employees need to feel a sense of trust in the leader, and they need to know that the leader trusts them. And that reciprocal trust is really key as well.
You've challenged me to think about the experiences I had in growth. It's interesting. There was no deliberate. I've had a lot of good career success. There was no deliberate architecting of it. The managers, the mentors that I appreciate the most were the ones that just let me run. They gave me the latitude to run, and they were there if I needed to come back because I had tripped all over myself.
Yeah, I had the same experience. I enjoyed leaders like that until I was almost 30 years old. I had no experience of anything other than go, do, try. When I would feel like my career was kind of getting stale, I kind of had that skill down, I would go and say, need more, and more would come my way, or different would come my way. And it wasn't until I was 30 that I had a manager who didn't behave like that. And man, what a rude awakening that was.
What a powerful teacher that manager was, though. Don't do it that way, right?
So true.
Yeah.
It's so true. And it did really inspire the rest of the work that I've done since then. When I had that experience, I had to look back and realize, man, there was some serious magic going on there. It went completely unnoticed. I had no idea the power of the behaviors of those previous leaders. And so it did actually spur me to move forward in this direction.
So I got the impression as I was reading that I might have been getting some of it wrong in my own time. I certainly tried to pay it forward for those leaders and managers that allowed me to run, but I spent a lot of time trying to engineer unique experiences for individuals. Did I make a mistake in that? I kind of got the impression I might have worked too hard at it.
Well, maybe you did. You might have put more into it than the other folks did. And the important thing ultimately is that folks own whatever the steps forward, because you can't do it for them.
Right.
But that said, I think a lot of employees, they would struggle to figure out what kind of an experience is possible, would be productive, could be supported by you. So from my perspective, that whole engineering of experiences piece is best done collaboratively with the other person. And as a leader, it's super helpful to have some kind of ideas in your hip pocket.
Sure. Yeah, and we always had context for, except at a few occasions where I shoved people into roles. It worked out great, but they didn't have the confidence until they were into it. So sometimes it's just a little bit of the sharp elbow. It's like, go, I believe in you. You can do it.
Yeah. And that goes back to that trust and confidence in others.
Yeah, trust. Amazing how powerful trust is, isn't it?
So true.
It comes up everywhere in everything. So a lot of what you talk about is kind of an agile approach to these discussions. Less formalized, not a quarterly sit down, 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there. What's your perspective on that? That's also kind of a new cadence for most managers.
Absolutely. Yeah. One and done is just done. We've seen that. We've lived it. Those annual conversations where you sit down and you just, work out the development problems of the world and you get them documented. That takes another month or two to get it in the system. And before you know it, the next year's come. Nothing else has happened with that. And you just revisit and keep playing that game over and over again. And it's demoralizing. It's debilitating. It doesn't move anything forward developmentally. And so the idea is, rather than sit down for 2 hours once a year with folks, what if you took that same 120 minutes and you broke it up? What if you had a 10-minute conversation every month, or 5 minutes every week, or just a moment a day? When we start spreading it out, I did a keynote recently for Cisco. And, a lot of the technology companies are moving toward a subscription approach to their business. And it got me thinking, with development, what if we thought about it from a subscription standpoint? Mm-hmm. It's not just like one payment that you make once a year, but rather you're revisiting it every week, every month, over time. And when we start doing that, we meet people where they are and where development is really possible. Because just because it's July 13th and it's development day doesn't mean anybody's ready for development.
You've got me, the mind reeling here. So it's kind of, instead of software as a service, instead of SaaS, it's DaaS, or career development as a service. I think we're onto something.
Love it. All right. We got work to do here.
All right. We got a couple of things what is it we're going to ban? We're going to ban something.
The bad question.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Out with that one. So let's try another quote here. I think this one was from Doug Conant in there. I'm a big fan of Doug's, and really appreciate that he's become quite a mentor and contributor to the leadership community. He says, genuine career development is not about forms, choreographing new assignments, or orchestrating promotions. It's about the quality of the conversations between a manager and an employee. Now, he did go on to add some content after that, so I'm taking a little bit out of context. But career development, just about the conversations. I got the impression when I read that there's still more to it. I kind of felt like that was... Who am I to criticize Doug? I'm not going to criticize Doug at all. Doug can criticize me all he wants, but I just felt like there was something missing there.
So what? What would be missing?
It's that active involvement of the manager above and beyond just talking or coaching. And maybe it goes back to my old habit of really trying hard to work with individuals to design those experiences for them and then coach them during that process. I felt like it was an immersive experience, not just maybe a bad label, a transactional coaching experience. And I think I'm probably misinterpreting Doug here.
Well, you know what, though? I think what you described in terms of working together to create those experiences, having the conversations that keep people moving forward, it's all conversation. Mm-hmm. So a lot of what you do, a lot of what great leaders do, happens within the context of conversation. And it's what we do in those envelopes of conversation, the value that we bring to them, how they help people move forward, that I think distinguishes the quality of the interaction or not. Mm-hmm. Now, where I want to not criticize Doug, because far be it from me, but where I want to build, I think, on what he says in that quote is the conversation between a manager and employee. Increasingly, I'm really seeing that it's a conversation between manager and employee, employee and employee, employee and customer, employee and vendor, employee and, so that the audience that we can draw upon in terms of gaining clarity in terms of our hindsight, for instance, and understanding the foresight, the audience that we can tap into for feedback and for support, I think that's going to grow and take some of the pressure off the shoulders of managers in the process.
Nicely said. Okay. So as I read this, by the way, I read books I love twice. I've read yours once and I will be going through it again. And I'm sorry I missed the first edition, but I'm so happy to have found the second edition. And where was it 20 years ago and 15 years ago, by the way, when I needed it?
I hear you.
I read it the first time and I'm inspired by it, and I turn the pages and I kind of walk away with this just, great feeling, which I did from your book, of, oh my gosh, I want to put this to work. I want to help people learn how to do this. I want to help managers do it. The second time through is more for the mechanics. Mm-hmm. So let's help with the mechanics issue. A manager goes through your book, has the same experience. They're buying it. They want to get started with it. They read this on the weekend and they want to change their behaviors starting next week. How do they start?
With a question. It's really that simple.
Okay.
By choosing a question and starting to practice the act of asking it and listening and being curious and taking that information with folks to the next level. I mean, it really is that simple. What we're talking about, when I step back and look at the book sometimes, I really think this isn't rocket science. This is human interactions 101. The key is finding the commitment and the time to make it a habit. Because I think most managers get into this business because they do want to help others and they do want to drive others forward, drive the business forward. And then you get caught up in all the day-to-day stuff.
I got to pause you on that one. Do you actually believe that? Do you think most managers get in the role of managing because they want to help? I'm going to politely disagree.
Okay. All right. Right after they wanted the pay bump.
The pay bump, or they were drafted because it was a battlefield promotion, or what have you. And again, I'm just teasing. But
no, you're right. I mean, there are a whole lot, but I think deep down, most leaders, when they step in, when they're or are thrown in,
right,
is this little nugget of I can make a difference here.
Well, I agree, and the good ones really internalize that
exactly, and act on it.
Right.
So it's a matter of building some habits that can permeate the day, that can work through the noise and the distractions and everything, that allow leaders to keep their focus on development over time and not get drug into, all of the other directions. So we actually developed and it's a free app on the Apple and the Android store that just pings leaders with a question a day for 3 months. And they are just invited, go ask that question of everybody at work, outside of work, just get in the habit.
So what do we get if we upgrade to the premium version?
Nothing. I can figure out the premium version.
It's your business model. You got to pay off the freemium with the premium.
I know. You know what? I'm really bad. The business side of the house. Yeah.
Have you had a client call up or highlight and say, Art, you give away too much for free? I actually had a client who brought me out, the Navy, the United States Navy, the group out there brought me out, and the gentleman that brought me in said, you give away too much for free.
What a lovely compliment.
It was wonderful. I was so thrilled to hear that because it's what I love to do and I want to help others.
Yeah. And, the truth is, if we can offer some tools that help leaders get better, it only helps everyone. Ultimately, it's going to, support the economy, organizations.
Absolutely.
Across the board. So we're doing our part.
So what about the number one manager's lament of, I know I should be doing that. I don't have enough time.
Oh, yeah. That's 3-1. We did some research on the front end of this to figure out, because, there's such a compelling business case, human case, employees are just craving this stuff, and yet it's not happening. And so had to kind of get to the bottom of that. Not having enough time was the number one issue that managers had. And you can't argue with that. This is the most time-starved generation of managers that have ever existed. So it's absolutely valid. And if we continue to think about career development as one more task on the to-do list, we're not going to get around to it. And so part of what we're trying to do with the book and the work that I do, the training and speaking and whatnot, is help people stop thinking about development as a transaction, as an interaction, but more as an ongoing relationship that plays out through conversation.
Nice. I'm back to the thinking about how this has legs. I mean, have you and your co-author thought of setting up a coaching program, a coaching network with this? This is so powerful. I could see this really becoming widespread. And of course, the more people you could have teaching it and spreading the word and showing and, teaching it basically, the faster it could go. Has that entered your mind?
Not exactly like that. I do a lot of training in organizations.
Sure.
Concepts inside.
Uh-huh.
My bias always is, my focus is on custom training because I don't think a skill like this can be just taken off the shelf. It really requires so much context that's organizationally oriented. But anyway, back to your idea, what my ideal implementation is when I go in and I can pass off the training to internal facilitators who do the training, who own it, who take care of it, and who support others in continuing to use it in the context of the organization.
What's the feedback been? What's the feedback been from clients out there?
It's been really positive.
Mm.
I think leaders really appreciate that we've been able to simplify what feels overwhelming and complex. Organizations, executives appreciate that we're making it a little bit easier to do what they know is necessary in terms of keeping the workforce engaged, being able to retain talent and meet business objectives. And employees certainly appreciate the attention that they're getting,
I can
the
imagine.
ongoing conversation, because that's so much more authentic. You had mentioned authenticity before, but a one and done conversation looks like we're checking the box. When a leader has these ongoing conversations, when they say, hey, I remember that we talked about you being interested in this. Have you considered XYZ? I mean, that means something. That telegraphs a lot to an employee.
It's showing respect. It's showing that you're paying attention. It shows that you care. I mean, it's
reinforced. Value.
Yes, it's reinforced over and over again. This really is a fascinating concept. Your twist on career development is agile and design thinking meet career development.
Yeah, kind of.
It's iterative, it's ongoing. There is a structure to it, but the structure is focused on questions and focused on the individual, empowering himself or herself. And yeah, I love it. So as you and your co-author worked through the second edition, what was it that you came away with? Either learning about the book, about yourself. I'm always interested in the writing experience as a personal learning experience. So, what came out of it for you?
Well, on the book and the content side, I think the learning was the confirmation that this idea of conversation, it's timeless.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter what's happened, in the world, in the business landscape. People value the relationship, the connection that they have that plays out through conversation. And so that piece of it, that was really confirming. And that while the business landscape has changed and we have gig workers, the pressure is even greater than it was before. Time is at a greater premium. Still, there's a way to make development happen if we treat it as a relationship and a conversation. So that was, I think, from a kind of a content standpoint, the big aha. I guess the other big aha was how interested people were in culturally what's required to make this sort of a shift happen.
Yeah, and I didn't talk about that, but there's a nice chapter in the book on that. It doesn't happen, at least at scale, without the right cultural setting.
Exactly. And so in the second edition, that was a brand new chapter that speaks to the cultural hallmarks that really can encourage that. On a personal front, I don't know about you, I find rework really challenging. Mm-hmm. Once I do something and get it out the door, I'm sort of done and on to the next. Yeah, it's interesting. I think millennials get a really bad rap about that, sort of let me master something and then let me do. I think we all have that. Anyone who, is ambitious and accomplished has that kind of a drive. And so what was challenging for me was sitting with this content and really asking myself the hard questions about, what is still valid, what's got to go, what's got to change, and not falling in love with anything too much that I wasn't willing to, use the red pen and start again. So that was a really challenging growth experience for me.
I can relate to that, and I have a project, my first book, that really begs a second edition, and I've gone to the edge a few times, and I've sat down and I've stared at it, and I just haven't been able to do it because I want to keep moving. So kudos to you for taking the time, and we're all the beneficiaries, and managers everywhere are the beneficiaries.
Thank you.
So the book, the app, is there anything else that goes along with it? Any other services, website?
Yeah. Another product that we developed when we put out the second edition in January was a deck of Help Them Grow cards.
Oh, cool.
So 45 different questions that sort to our hindsight, foresight, and insight model, and 7 different activities that you can use to make career development more a daily part of life. Mm-hmm. So the cards are available as well. And then I do a ton of keynoting and training in organizations.
That's
And
fabulous. And where should we find more about you?
my website is juliewinklegiulioni.com.
And I'll include the links in the podcast notes and what have you. And I'm so happy we got to hear from your dog. And my cat did not barge through the door as I promised. So
I was kind of disappointed. I was watching the door.
Julie, this was an incredible pleasure. I genuinely love the book. I'm going to feature this book in my First Time Managers Academy. I'm going to feature this book in my Challenging Conversations program. These are online programs, and I'm going to reference it far and wide. I just find it a tremendous resource. Thank you, and thank your co-author for this wonderful tool for all of us.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about it, Art. This has been such a treat.
It's been great. Take care.
Thank you, too.